With companies scrambling to get their Salesforce configuration updates up and running, Salesforce DevOps is a popular topic in the industry. You may not be aware of the significant impact a good DevOps approach can have on your company's success. When you consider what DevOps can do for your business, you'll be thankful that you made the investment. During this podcast interview, Andrew Davis explains how a strong DevOps strategy can make all the difference for your company's internal Salesforce releases. I'm certain you'll enjoy listening to this discussion as much as I enjoyed recording it.
Welcome to the Brainiate Show, where we talk about all things Salesforce, sharing the coolest features, solutions, and best practices to turn you into a Salesforce rock star. Here's your host, former attorney turned Salesforce consultant and trainer, David Giller.
Andrew Davis, welcome to the Brainiate Show. How are you today?
I'm doing great, David. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. I'm excited to have you on. Can you help introduce yourself? Tell the audience who you are and what you do in the Salesforce ecosystem.
Sure. I currently work for Copado. So Copado is a company that helps to ease the development lifecycle for Salesforce, helping you to move and to test changes. I arrived at Copado because of being a subject matter nerd in this topic of DevOps for Salesforce. I've been focused on this for 6 or 7 years. I wrote a book, Mastering Salesforce DevOps, and joined Copado when we were just starting to take off maybe 2.5 years ago. And I got interested in this topic of DevOps for Salesforce just based on my own experience as a Salesforce developer. I'd done a bit of a career shift and ended up as basically a junior level developer on the Salesforce team at Aperio. And when you're the junior developer, naturally, you're the one that they assign to do the deployments because, of course, nobody wants to do the deployments. So like make the new guy do it. So I would end up spending half the day every Friday doing deployments. And it was horrible and tedious and manual, and noticed that there was no version control. So I had no idea, like I would write some code and then I'd come back to it a week later. And somebody else changed this. Did I just forget what I'd written? And then just realizing we're flying blind without version control. And so just began to improve my own understanding of what the options were for tracking Salesforce changes in version control, automating deployments, automating testing, and just became passionate.
Love that. Tell us a little bit about your work before you or what you were busy with before you started getting into technology.
I did have an unusual background. I spent almost 15 years as a Buddhist monk. And during that time, I was primarily teaching meditation and running meditation centers in the US. And it's funny you asked, what was I doing before I got into technology? But of course, I got into technology as a child. So it's now 35 years or so that since I started working on computers. And so I always had some interest there. But even as a child, I got very disaffected with the direction from my perception, the direction that society was going in. I just felt humanity was not exactly on a great path in terms of looking after one another, looking after the natural world, maintaining our own sanity, the incredible consumerization and the way our energy becomes consumed in working to try to just buy stuff to perpetuate a cycle that's not really leading to satisfaction. So I went through the motions of getting a degree in engineering, but my passion was increasingly for the internal development, and found a Buddhist meditation center in Baltimore where I'd lived, and then became involved there, became a monk, and ended up teaching. But I'd actually kept warm in the technology space through that time. It's not unusual that if you show up at a small nonprofit organization, and if you have some legal skills, you become the legal guy. If you have technical skills, you become a technical person. So I did a lot of technology work even during that time. Kept warm in that, including at one point implementing Salesforce for a small meditation center, just because we had no idea who was coming to these meditation classes. People come and they go, and I had no way to keep in touch with them. And I stumbled on free licenses for nonprofits. And in our world, there was no money flowing. So free was a very special, precious word for me. I thought, okay, Salesforce, let's give it a shot. And so I actually learned Visualforce and Apex back in 2008, or what I do is just coming out, and beginning to set up some tools for that. And so that basically gave me a warm feeling towards Salesforce. And so when I left being a monk, that was where I gravitated, feeling like this is something I could always bring back into the nonprofit world, but it was also technology I like working on.
So in retrospect, it really was a very natural, organic progression of your career path.
Yeah. Even within the Buddhist world, people have technology problems, right? And so I provided value in that world by helping to solve their technology problems. They would have these terrible, weird problems. We'd have a web server for hosting a website about meditation classes, and we would get hacked. So I'd have to learn a little bit about forensics and security and all these kinds of things. I realized that although my main wish was just to sit and meditate, it was an incredibly important act of service for me to just roll up my sleeves and be helpful and struggle through it. And that all of this was a spiritual activity based, just like struggling through, trying to help people solve their problems, trying to help this greater mission. And really gave me a taste for how spiritual activity is incredibly diverse and varied.
From what you just described, what I'm hearing is technology is really cool, but it's just a tool. And when we are using the tool to solve problems, that's where magic is happening. Otherwise, it's just another shiny object.
Yeah. And there's multiple levels of solving problems, right? I love puzzle solving. When I got my first job as a developer at Aperio, I just felt, oh my gosh, they're paying me to solve puzzles all day. I'm like, what a great gig this is. I went from having a lot of responsibilities to having no responsibilities other than fixing a whole long list of bugs. And it was such a relief to felt like an easy job, difficult technical problems, but there was not a lot of complexity, stress, and so forth in a macro level. So I love problem solving. And I think a lot of people who are attracted to technology love the problem solving aspect, but you need to also look at the macro level. What is the problem your company is solving? Or is your company creating more problems than they're solving? Like, where are we taking societies? Technology is incredible because of its power, but at some level, you got to figure out who is really deriving value from this. Who are we enriching or benefiting? And what is their motivation? Where are we taking all this? Technology is basically an engine for exploiting opportunities to be more efficient, effective, and saving energy for humans because we're naturally lazy and so forth. But where are we taking all of this? And it's critically important, I think, for technologists to not just show up and do a job, solve puzzles, but figure out, are we really helping on a macro level as well?
Excellent insight. I love it. Let's shift over and focus a little bit on DevOps. Your area of niche focus right now is in the DevOps world. So for those who are not familiar with even the term, the concept of DevOps, what is DevOps?
DevOps is a catchy term that basically is shorthand for the new way of doing things as opposed to the old way of doing things. And literally it is that broad and that vague and can be used to encompass anything that sort of fits the bill of like new way of doing things versus old way of doing things in the domain of software development. Originally, it was especially about this challenge of uniting development teams and operations teams. Now, in the Salesforce world, we don't think in terms of operations teams, we think about admins. Basically, the difference between developers who are focused on creating something new, it's the creative part of the process, and operations people who are focused on helping to maintain existing systems, make sure that they don't break. There is a natural tension between people creating new stuff and people maintaining the way things are. And that is just a fundamental tension woven into the fabric of the universe, right?
Yeah.
Like some people really want change and novelty, but the number one risk to an existing system that's working well is change and novelty. So you got to figure out how to balance benefits of innovation with the risks of change. And so gets into this topic of working with sandboxes, using deployments, automating tests, and using version control. And that's the big category of DevOps. I was thinking about your work with Brainiate in the training space. That is what learning is. Learning is changing the mind. And there was someone who made just an offhand comment to me that really is stuck in my mind, that learning is error correction for the mind,
Mm.
and it is intrinsically painful. And because it implies that you're somehow wrong or your knowledge is inadequate and so forth. And I really feel like the ability for an organization, not just an individual, but for an organization to learn is critically important. There's a book I'm a big fan of called Lean Enterprise by Jez Humble and friends. And they introduced the concept of learning anxiety versus survival anxiety. And so most people have some learning anxiety. They're not sure they want to invest the time. They're not sure they can learn. And we've got all these post-traumatic stress disorder from exams, school, and so forth that make that a little bit of a challenging thing. But then there's survival anxiety. And only when your survival anxiety becomes higher than your learning anxiety are you willing to actually take the plunge and say, okay, I've got to do this. And so, of course, anything we can do to reduce the anxiety around learning, which I think Trailhead does an amazing job of, and skilled teachers can do an amazing job of helping to reduce the anxiety around learning, then that is critically important because it takes energy, and humans and all living beings are naturally oriented towards conserving energy, but not necessarily with a wisdom of long-term wisdom. Short-term, I don't really need to learn this process. I'll get away with it. And so they're saving time in the short term because they're not taking 8 hours to learn the new system, but they're wasting a phenomenal amount of time in the long term.
I think it's funny how you expressed the anxiety and fears around training and adopting change for people and thinking of it in terms of short term versus long term investment. And it's so true. I just never really thought of it like that. So that's a phenomenal perspective that you shared. Let me ask you this. What do you think are some of the biggest challenges that you see today in the Salesforce ecosystem regarding DevOps?
I would say the first is just probably a lack of awareness of the importance of software development lifecycle. And this is the traditional term that's used in software engineering, where you have basically, you've got a development environment where you can be fully creative. You've got a testing environment where you're basically taking the stuff you've built and, for example, as you mentioned, exposing it to end users for them to play with and give feedback on, and then your production environment. Those three different environments or three different stages have very different needs. Production needs stability, development needs creativity, and testing is your in-between transitional phase. And that is just assumed knowledge in the software development world, but that is not what you get trained in. First learn how to be a Salesforce admin. And so the default is that you just assume that you've got to do all three of those activities in production. You want to create something new, you can do it in production. You want to test it out, you do it in production. You want to run the system in production. And that kind of works okay as long as the stakes are fairly low. But as you get more users and stakes get higher and so forth, then it doesn't work. And rightly, the needs of production users, don't break stuff, and don't break stuff, outweigh all the other needs, and you can stifle creativity. And so you have people who are locked out of production, and that's actually appropriate, but you haven't yet learned how to set up sandboxes for development, sandboxes for testing, sandboxes for production. So that's just knowing that. Ignorance is the first obstacle. And the second is then figuring out how to make that smooth and not realizing that there's a better way, right? When you're doing everything in production, that's one form of misery. When you have development and testing sandboxes, but you have a very slow process to move changes between them, and you don't have good methods for testing, you don't have a good rigor around that, that's a second form of misery. So you need to have development and testing environments, and you need to have a very smooth process for expediting changes through there. And that's really what DevOps speaks to.
I love the way you describe some of these challenges because more often than not, I see people communicating about DevOps as here is our process for how we get things from a concept into production, and that's it. Just follow this process. That's what DevOps is. And to the new Salesforce admin who has not yet experienced the pain of doing something with the best of intentions, doing something directly in production, not really understanding the value of doing things in a sandbox first and testing it, and then getting startled by those surprises that come about by having done these things in production. Oh, nobody ever really thought through the impact that certain people should not see certain fields, or there's other automation that conflicts with what we just introduced. Then they start to learn the hard way. And the way you just described it, I think, is a very holistic and organic and very healthy way to understand some of these concepts around DevOps, where really it's in everyone's benefit, and users as well as the admins, to follow this fundamental process that DevOps defines within the organization. So thank you. What do you think are some of the biggest myths that people have regarding DevOps?
I liked the way you framed it right there, that it refers to some kind of a static process, or that it refers to just buying a tool and that the tool itself is going to magically help it to happen. We go through a learning curve, and people are trying to expend minimum amount of mental energy. They have to understand what DevOps is. So it's understandable that people come to these very limited understandings of what it actually is all about. Not appreciating the real meaning, I think, is one big myth. Thinking that you can just bring a tool in and it's going to automatically solve the process is another myth. Thinking that you can build it all yourself without investing a lot of time and energy is also a bit of a failing. And so the benefit of commercial tools, now for a commercial interlude, for my employer, Copado, for example, the benefit of commercial tools like that is that they just save people a ton of energy and time rather than trying to build these things themselves. Because like you say, you can learn the hard way about the danger of making changes in production. You can also learn the hard way about how sophisticated you've got to be if you really want to build all the necessary scripts and processes and so forth to do it yourself. And I've learned both of those things the hard way. And learning the hard way is the most memorable form of learning.
Andrew, let's elaborate a little bit more on how does Copado help bring DevOps under control for organizations that are utilizing Salesforce?
Copado has concentrated a phenomenal amount of brain power and energy and attention and money and so forth on this. And so I joined Copado because it was the fastest growing organization in this space. And I have been grateful for that decision, because that basically the concentration of energy and intention allows us to take a multifaceted approach to helping to solve this problem. We build a product that makes it straightforward for admins to track their work and version control, automate deployments, run automated tests, monitor the status of your work in production, and get metrics on the development process. Provides an enormous amount of resources. B, we provide professional services to help get team stood up, and not just to install the tool, but really to help the team get trained, and not just trained on our product, but really trained with processes that they need. Because again, this is a human machine interaction, right? And that's, I think, what we don't fully appreciate is that you cannot think just about the tools, whether Salesforce or Copado or whatever, and you can't think just about the people. You have to think about both the tools and the people together and the interaction between them. And then Copado's got very rich, customer support, customer success, academy for training, evangelism, webinars, and so forth, really basically advancing the whole state of the industry. So I really feel like we're maybe not perfect across every single front, but we're really pushing the whole industry forward across every angle of this.
I love it, because DevOps involves so many different steps in the process that can be perceived as roadblocks where they really shouldn't be. To me, they are safeguards. They're not roadblocks. The same way, like, we put on a seatbelt when we get into a car, at least most of us put on a seatbelt when we get into a car. Okay, it's restricting. It's trying to help save yourself for a reason. So in my mind, Copado helps ease that burden by also providing a wealth of tools of technology to give visibility and transparency and make it easier to manage, where otherwise managing it manually would be so much more painful.
And I love the analogy, the seatbelts. You look in my book, Mastering Salesforce DevOps, I've actually got a chart of auto safety over the last 100 years and the introduction of seatbelts and the reduction in death due to that, the introduction of airbags, the reduction of death due to that, the automatic braking systems are coming into play these days. Self-driving cars, although it's very fringe right now, it is a phenomenal safety innovation, right?
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about a very common scenario that many Salesforce admins, particularly newer Salesforce admins, find themselves in. And it can be super frustrating. This is actually a scenario that I am intimately familiar with because when I was working at GE, I found myself in this situation myself. I did not see it as frustrating as most people see it today. I'm not really sure why, but the scenario is this. Salesforce admin joins an organization, understanding that they're going to be a Salesforce admin. They look for a job as a Salesforce admin. The job title may or may not even have the word Salesforce or admin in it, but they were hired to help with the implementation of Salesforce at an organization. And then when they actually start the job, they are shocked and horrified to discover that they are not given access as a system administrator in the production instance of Salesforce. And usually it's because the production instance of Salesforce is managed by a group within IT or a separate group. And whether it's political reasons or honestly, I'm going to automatically assume it can be completely 100% justified why that admin does not have access. That new hire, that Salesforce admin, is shocked and horrified and dismayed and is ready to look for another job. So my question to you is, what would be your advice, your feedback for that admin who finds themselves in this situation?
I can feel that scenario very well. I can feel it viscerally and emotionally. And our immediate reaction is to feel it's not fair. And my alternatives just seem impossibly hard. Like I don't want to go through this long change request process and put a request into some outside team. And that's, I think, just the way our mind naturally functions. We experience the immediate environment around us. I want to do this. I've got this great idea. I'm hitting a roadblock. Frustration. And you've got a good point. And so you need to figure out how. You are absolutely right. You've got great creative ideas and great creative skills. They are absolutely right. Nobody should be changing stuff in production. How do you reconcile that? You need a development sandbox, you need a testing sandbox, and you need an expedited way. And I would say definitely expedited tools to help you to move those changes from development to testing to production. And that's going to require some energy, perhaps, for you to expend some energy requesting the sandbox. It's going to require you to have some courage to basically raise your voice and say, listen, this is suboptimal. This is not the optimal situation. I know unique problems my department is facing that I could solve. If I solve those problems, that has value for the entire organization. I appreciate we have security controls. I need a way to safely create solutions for my team and expedite them to production that respect those security controls. And that's grown-up land, right? That's the way grown-ups in enterprise are. It's like, okay, yes, we need controls and protection. Yes, we need creativity. Let's find, and literally this is the problem of DevOps. Let's find a way to enable both creativity and security and safety at the same time by having a good development lifecycle.
So in the end, what you're recommending is, aside from not taking it personally and having the company's best interests in mind, approaching the IT team or whichever team is responsible for Salesforce and essentially asking, hey, I get it, I respect it, but at the same time, would it be possible for me to get my own sandbox, which minimizes the risk and the fear that you, IT team, has on me accidentally breaking something or stepping on your toes? So give me my own sandbox. And even if there's no data in there and I'll create a whole bunch of fictitious records to simulate realistic ones. This way I can do whatever it is that I need to in my sandbox without damaging anything in the production. And at the same time, make those configuration changes that my colleagues here are asking for, do the proof of concept in the sandbox. And when appropriate, I will absolutely go ahead and comply with your rules of filling out this work ticket or documenting the business requirements and even letting you, IT team, leverage the configuration changes that I've already done. I'll create the change set for you where you can then just go ahead and move it into another sandbox yourselves for UAT testing where that can be done safely. Is that right? Did I just repeat that correctly?
100%. It requires that you expend some energy. But the point is, you're expending energy in such a way that you really are benefiting the organization. And the sort of the pattern that you described, right? Recognize that this is actually the pattern that you described. Don't take it personally. Recognize that you do have ideas that will validly benefit the organization. Figure out the strategy to address that, and then be patient and exert the energy necessary to do that. And then it's a big hurdle to overcome initially, I admit. But once you do that, the world gets better for everybody at the company. And you mentioned change sets. Also, do your research on options that go beyond change sets, right? Like change sets are not the world's easiest user interface. Like, there's better options as well.
Capado perhaps have something that can address this and relieve people of change set hell.
We perhaps might, yes. But this is a strategy that's not just going to help make your work life better temporarily. This is a strategy that's going to serve you for the rest of your career. And in fact, even outside of work. Again, don't take it personally. Figure out what is going to bring the most benefit for everybody else, and then apply some energy and make the world better. Make your little world of the company better. It's where you start.
Absolutely. So, by the way, I just want to also chime in and elaborate a little bit for folks who are listening to this advice and they are thinking, great, but I'm still feeling very limited. I feel entitled to access as a system admin in production and still have some kind of bitter taste in their mouth with this recommendation. I just want to share my own personal experience being in this exact situation where when I first joined GE Capital, I was in the IT department, and I was in the IT department for, I don't remember off the top of my head, maybe 3 years. And then I moved from IT into marketing, where I basically became my own customer. So I was still working with the exact same colleagues that I was working before in IT, but now I was on the business side in marketing, gathering of the business requirements and writing up what those requirements were, handing it over to my former colleagues in IT to go ahead and implement. And it was really once I was pretty much as soon as I got over into marketing, that's when the Salesforce project landed on my lap. So I was in the same room as my colleagues in IT. We were a very small team learning Salesforce together at the same time. And for various reasons, I completely fell in love with Salesforce for the most part, way earlier than most of my colleagues did. They were like arms folded, like, great, we have to learn this new technology. What the heck? What's going on here? And I was totally falling in love with it. So we were all learning Salesforce at the same time, but I embraced it way earlier than they did. So here we were now working on Salesforce projects. And because I was in marketing, I was no longer in IT. I was not entitled to have production access as a system admin, no matter what. And there was no question about it. Like, it was just not happening. I actually did exactly what we just talked about, which is I asked for my own sandbox where I had to make sure it was my responsibility to make sure that it was being refreshed on a somewhat regular basis so that it actually reflected what's going on in production. So that this way, and for those of you who are not familiar with it, believe me, GE has a lot of red tape when it comes to putting in any change request for anything in any system. So when I was working with my colleagues in the business about the changes that they wanted to make from a sales, marketing, customer service, operational perspective in Salesforce, I still had the exact same responsibilities of gathering the business requirements, documenting the business requirements. But now I was also able to go ahead and implement it in my own sandbox. And guess what? My colleagues in IT, they were thrilled that I was doing it in a sandbox because they knew that I was taking some of the burden away from them. They felt comfortable with my going ahead and implementing whatever I wanted in my sandbox and testing it out, validating, doing that proof of concept with the people who asked for those changes before ever turning back to the folks in IT saying, all right, these configuration elements, we're ready to move it into a UAT environment for additional testing. I still had to document every single element that I made, every field that I created, every validation rule that I created in my sandbox, as if I was a member of the IT team creating it myself. So I'm very familiar with it, and it worked really well for everyone's benefit. The business users loved it because they were seeing a quicker turnaround, at least from the time of concept to logging in to test something. My colleagues in IT loved it because I was taking some of the burden away from them. And I loved it because I was able to learn in a hands-on environment. I was able to learn and play around even more than I would have otherwise.
And one theory on why you might have been able to navigate that, what a lot of people find that daunting, is that you had pre-existing personal relationships with folks in IT.
Yes.
So that's one strategy. Another one of these strategies that'll really help folks: take people out to lunch, or have a virtual, chat with them, connect with them on Slack. Humanize those relationships. Don't just think about it as IT or compliance. Like, get to know those people and understand what are their concerns, and that they're not trying to make you work hard. And so building those personal relationships is massively helpful.
Which helps solidify the trust and shows that you are an ally for them. They are an ally of yours. And you're really on the same team, even though you're not working in the same department. Andrew, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. I'm sure my audience really appreciates your insights. You are amazing. Do you have any parting words of wisdom for the listeners?
I'm thrilled to have a chance to join you, David. I'm happy for folks to follow me on LinkedIn or Twitter if you want to stay in touch. I've also launched a new initiative working on a new book. So if you check that out at inside-out.work, inside-out.work. So looking at the human elements of technology.
And I'm going to include a link to that and a link to Capado in the show notes. So thank you for that. Andrew, have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll talk to you soon.
Fantastic, David. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Brainy 8 Show. Make sure to subscribe on Spotify, Audible, or Apple Podcasts so that you don't miss any future episodes. Don't forget to check out the show notes where you'll find links to any resources mentioned. If there's a topic you would like to hear about on an upcoming episode, drop me a note on Twitter or LinkedIn. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks again and have an awesome day.